For those who consider the Montgomery bus boycott to have been a success, then that was the catapulting of Dr. Martin Luther King onto the national scene, and as a result of that, he became the Paramount Chief, supplanting Roy Wilkins. So he toppled Roy Wilkins from the perch atop the black leaders and spokespersons, and he became the Paramount Chief. And he retained that position, even though a contemporary of his was your and my hero, Brother Malcolm X. But Malcolm X never achieved Paramount Chieftaincy. That was the role that was held by Dr. Martin Luther King, and you can't really argue against that, even though ideologically I'm on the other side of the fence from Dr. King. But he was the Paramount Chief. And all of the other leaders and chiefs were basically subordinate to him because, again, when the media or anyone else wanted a credible voice on things having to do with black folk, it was Dr. King that they would go to, and it was his word that they would accept. Whether they agreed with what he said or not, he was considered to be the authoritarian voice relative to everything that has to do with black people. Then, of course, Dr. King was assassinated. And for a period of time, there was jockeying and shoving amongst the other chiefs, the leaders and spokespersons, for who would inherit the mantle of Paramount Chieftaincy, the vacuum that had been left after the assassination of Dr. King. No one really was successful in replacing Dr. King initially, until some years later, one of his former lieutenants, one by the name of Reverend Jesse Jackson, came up with the brilliant idea that he should cast his hat in the ring and attempt to wrest the Democratic Party's nomination for President of the United States. This was in 1984, I believe. And as a result of his, again, success or relative success, not in getting the nomination, and certainly not in being elected president, but in making himself the preeminent black person in America, if not the world, Jesse Jackson became the successor to Dr. King's legacy as Paramount Chief amongst all of the black chiefs. And everyone else then deferred to Jesse Jackson. And Jesse Jackson held on to that title, or that position, as I would call it, for at least 10 years. And then in 1995, another brother, Minister Louis Farrakhan, came up with yet an even more brilliant scheme from a black perspective, in my opinion. And he traveled the country for an entire year, speaking in the major venues in America's major cities to standing room only audiences of black men only, chastising us for our failures to be men to our women and providers and protectors to our children. And then he came up with the idea that, I'll tell you what, I want all of you to agree, and I want 1 million of you to come to Washington. Yes, it's one thing for me to speak to from 15 to 25 or 30,000 people at a time in these different cities, Madison Square Garden or wherever it is around the country. But let's do 1 million. I'm going to set a date next year, and I want 1 million of you all, 1 million black men, to march on Washington. And we're going to flex our muscle as a race and as black men and declare that this status quo situation is over and black men are ready to become black men, finally and permanently. And you know the rest. 2.5 million of us showed up, including you and I. And so as a result of that and that success, which nobody expected Minister Farrakhan would be able to pull off, he was catapulted into the position of Paramount Chief. And I might add that that was the first time since the days of the Honorable Marcus Garvey that a person associated with the ideology of self-reliance and self-determination had achieved the status of Paramount Chief, and he held on to that for about 10 years. However, if I might say so, and as much as I love and admire Minister Farrakhan, I believe that he did us somewhat of a disservice in not declaring his ascendancy to the Paramount Chieftaincy as a victory for self-reliance and self-determination philosophically, and even more so, from my standpoint, black nationalism and Pan-Africanism ideologically. Sure, we all knew where he stood on those matters because his whole career had been based on promoting self-reliance and self-determination, Pan-Africanism, black nationalism amongst black people. But in all fairness, he did not make that an integral part of his advocacy once he became the Paramount Chief. But he was the Paramount Chief, and he did hold on to that position for 10 years. Then there came a break between the minister and some of his newfound integrationist and assimilationist friends, namely Tavis Smiley and the professor up at Princeton now. They had a break at one of Tavis Smiley's own annual State of Black America events, where Tavis announced the release of his covenant with Black America. And Minister Farrakhan, on the podium with Tavis and Cornel West, had the audacity, I guess they felt, to actually be critical of the document and likened it to something that Martin Luther King had indicated about when he questioned his own work and said, is it possible that we're advocating integrating into a burning house? Because he saw America as the burning house, and here we were as black people trying to integrate into it under the leadership of Dr. King. And he questioned whether or not he was actually advocating the integration into a burning house. Minister Farrakhan pointed that out at Tavis's State of Black America event in 2005, and he was chastised rather roundly and soundly by both Tavis Smiley and Dr. Cornel West for having raised questions about Tavis's great accomplishment, which was the creation of this covenant with Black America. As a result of that, and them chastising the minister, and him getting the worst of that, Tavis Smiley emerged out of that as the new Paramount Chief. Now it was Tavis Smiley that everyone would run to for what thus saith the black community, or what was credible relative to the black community. However, 1 year later, again at Tavis's own event, Tavis was upstaged and unseated from the Paramount Chieftaincy by the good friend, toppled him. So at that point, I maintain that Reverend Al Sharpton became the Paramount Chief amongst all of the black spokespersons and leaders in America at Tavis's event 1 year later. And I believe it was the one where he had the meeting in Virginia to celebrate the 200th anniversary of the landing of some ship or something like that. But the point that's important for what we're talking about is it was on that occasion that Reverend Al Sharpton unseated or catapulted himself into the position of the Paramount Chief amongst black folks and black leaders and black spokespeople.